to another Purple Insider Extra. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Purple Insider's Matthew Collar. And Collar, oh boy, was the rumor mill alive and buzzing for the Minnesota Vikings this weekend. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler said this on ESPN over the weekend. I asked some executives around the league what teams would make sense for Lamar Jackson. They mentioned Tennessee, who has just cleared some cap space, and they have a new GM in Rand Carthon, who's working on the roster. They could use a running quarterback. They have experience with that. And a wild card like Minnesota. Kirk Cousins has 1 year left on his contract if they want to reestablish their identity there. First off, wow, Vikings being linked with Lamar Jackson. Your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, wow is right. I was very surprised to see that, especially since when Kirk Cousins' contract was restructured, it became harder to trade before June 1st. Now, if they were to do it after June 1st, then the cap hits end up getting much more manageable and spread out toward the future. But normally, post June 1st, things don't happen very often because most of the offseason is done and everybody's teams are set at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, it seems like a pie in the sky. You would have to find ways to move on from Kirk Cousins and also give out a massive, massive contract to Lamar Jackson. And then the Baltimore Ravens would have to not decide to match that contract. Like, there's a lot of moving parts that would have to happen. So it was something that when Vikings fans brought up to me, if they sent, questions in or whatever, it's kind of be like, okay, well, yeah, you would do that, but is that really possible? But now that somebody who does have a past, by the way, in Minnesota, Jeremy Fowler, brings it up, it gives credibility to that conversation. And then your imagination starts to run wild. Like, what would an offense look like with Lamar Jackson? I mean, you're talking about the potential for somebody who's 26 years old, already has an MVP underneath their belt, one of the most exciting players in the NFL. And, I also thought that this was one of the most exciting moments of the last few years for the Vikings. I know last year was a really fun season for them, but there's been a lot of downs and not a lot of exciting moments for Vikings fans over the last few years. And to have the idea of somebody like Lamar Jackson, which would be, Dante Culpepper, Randy Moss 2.0 if he were able to come to the Vikings. So yeah, I mean, very, very exciting for Vikings fans to think about, though how realistic it is, I'm still not entirely convinced, put it that way.
Well, let's jump into the realism of it. The reason why Lamar Jackson is even in this situation is because he's a restricted free agent. The Ravens have placed a tag on him. That means that if a team other than the Ravens does eventually sign him, they have to give up 2 first-round picks. We'll get to that in a second. But the Ravens also have the right to match that contract, whatever that team offers Lamar Jackson. There are no more poison pills. The NFL has taken that out after the Vikings did it to the Seahawks a number of years ago. So two-party here. How do the Vikings sign Jackson to a contract that the Ravens wouldn't be able to match while also making their own salary cap work with Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill, all these big money pieces on the offense? And is Jackson worth 2 first-round picks?
Yeah, the second part is absolutely yes. Lamar Jackson is worth 2 first-round picks. I mean, I think that if you're trying to debate how good he is at football, it's sort of like saying Steph Curry is going to be too skinny to play in the NBA. We've already resolved this. He has gone 45-16 in the regular season. He's got 4 playoff appearances already, and he's only 26 years old. Remember, Hendon Hooker is like 25. So then think about just the relative age of Lamar Jackson. You would be getting a megastar quarterback with an extremely high ceiling at the peak of his prime, just coming into his prime. And so that part is, yeah, I mean, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. If you put him in the NFC, where does he rank? It's got to be number 1 or maybe number 2 behind Jalen Hurts. So yeah, I mean, that's an obvious one that you would move draft capital for him. You're probably going to have to move draft capital to draft a quarterback anyway, whether it's this year or next year. Might as well do it for somebody who's much more of a sure thing where you know exactly what the ceiling is for them. As far as offering him a contract that Baltimore won't match, I think that's one of the most challenging parts here. I mean, because Lamar tweeted out the offer that the Ravens gave him, and it was pretty significant. 3 years, $133 million or something like that. I mean, so you're going to have to go with more than that. Does he want more long-term stability? Does he want kind of a Mahomes deal that's for 10 years that makes sure that he is a whatever team for life? Or does he want the shortest term possible? Does he want 2 years, 100 million, all guaranteed? Like, we don't really know because he's his own agent. So it isn't like agents are leaking things out to the insiders of the NFL to try to swing the tide one way or the other. But that is the difficult part, because I can guarantee you that Baltimore does not want Lamar Jackson to go anywhere. But at the same time, there's got to be some price where they would just say, it's too much, we'll just take the draft picks.
So let's look into the future and to the prospective future. The Vikings do land Lamar Jackson. He's a bit different, obviously, from the way Kirk Cousins has played in Kevin O'Connell's offense. How would Lamar Jackson fit into Kevin O'Connell's offensive scheme?
Yeah, I don't think that you really keep any sort of hard scheme and say you fit into the scheme. You build it around Lamar Jackson. I mean, they did, and I don't want to be like conspiracy theory person, but they did add his blocking tight end, Josh Oliver, in free agency. I'm just saying. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. But yeah, you would go with more, 12 personnel, put tight ends, fullbacks on the field. You're going to set up your running game differently to be more of a RPO and power running game than the outside zone that they've had in the past. But look, I mean, this is somebody that you build an offense to all of his biggest strengths. And again, with Lamar Jackson and his passing, I was looking this up, and he has a higher quarterback rating since he came into the league than Matthew Stafford. Like, this is a guy that has strengths as a passer. And, I think if you're pairing him with Justin Jefferson, you just ask those two guys what they want to do and what works for them. And then you do it over and over and over again. You take some of the things that worked really well for the Ravens, and then you also improve on things that didn't work that well for the Ravens. I think we've seen some receivers for Baltimore call out their former offensive system. I don't think it was that effective for him as a passer. And that's where Kevin O'Connell comes in, where we saw, even in the playoffs last year, there were other coaches stealing passing concepts from Kevin O'Connell. He was really excellent this year at getting receivers open, especially Justin Jefferson. He comes from a scheme where they threw a million times to Cooper Kupp in Los Angeles. I think you can make that connection work extremely, extremely well, while also playing to Lamar Jackson's strengths. It's still very pie in the sky. It's still very unlikely that all the parts could come together to make this happen. But Kevin O'Connell, being a former quarterback himself, I think fully understands how to build around a quarterback's strengths.
That's been another Purple Insider Extra for Bring Me the Sports. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Purple Insider Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you next time.